Best U.S. fighter planes ever. P51 Mustang. Controlling the air proved key to controlling the ground. During the Second World War, American bombers suffered devastating losses. In the October 1943 raid on Schweinfurt alone, almost 20% of the bombers were lost. So, the obvious solution was to provide fighter escorts beyond the western edge of Germany. In that time, the P-47 Thunderbolt lacked the range to escort bombers, and the P-38 Lightning had range, but proved unsuitable for high-altitude combat over Europe. The long-range P-51 Mustang fighter was invaluable to the Allied victory, enabling resumption of strategic bombing after heavy losses suffered by unescorted bombers. Mustangs provided long-range escort to B-17s and B-24s, and scored heavily over German interceptors. By the war's end, P-51s had destroyed 4,950 enemy aircraft in the air, more than any other U.S. fighter in Europe. Developed for export to Britain, models modified by the British to use Rolls-Royce Merlin engines became America's most capable wartime fighters. Though production contracts were canceled at war's end, the P-51 remained in service with the Air Force for several years thereafter. P-51s, some taken out of mothballs, were used for ground attack missions early in the Korean War. F4U Corsair. One of the greatest fighters of all time, the American Vought F4U Corsair became the legend for its part in the air wars of World War II, Korean War, and during the French colonial wars in Indochina and Algeria. The Whistling Death, as the Japanese dubbed it, was a formidable aircraft. Corsair was a relatively large fighter with a distinctive profile, marked by gull wings and a big, powerful engine. It was designed as a Navy fighter, but it was so fast that it couldn't land on U.S. Navy carriers. In March of 1943, the land-based Marines were the first U.S. forces to fly the Corsair in combat. It was not until the British proved that the Corsair could safely operate from carriers that the Navy put the type into service in January of 1944. With a range of nearly 1,000 miles, the Corsair wasn't quite as long-legged as the Mustang, but it still could have escorted many bomber missions. Corsair pilots managed over 500 air kills by the end of 1943 and totaled some 2,140 enemy aircraft by the end of World War II. Their pilots became aces during the war. Some Japanese pilots regarded it as the most formidable American fighter of the World War, and its naval aviators achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio. F86 Sabre. Taking advantage of flight research data seized from the German Luftwaffe at the end of the war, the North American P-86 Sabre was the first American aircraft to use swept wings, as was used on the German Messerschmitt Me-262. The aircraft served a pivotal role in the Korean War by winning back air superiority for the NATO allies, going toe-to-toe with the impressive Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-15 Fagot. Admittedly, the superior training and tactics of the U.S. pilots brought about a large part of this success. For the Sabre had inferior performance when compared to the MiG-15. It was slower and unable to maneuver as well as the MiG above 25,000 feet. Its service ceiling of 48,000 feet was much lower than the MiG. Aircraft arrived in Korea on December 1950. Within 2 weeks, the Sabre had established a kill ratio of better than 8-to-1 over the MiG. Nevertheless, the appearance of the Sabre was the beginning of the end for the MiG-15 in Korea. Originally designed as a high-altitude day fighter, the Sabre was subsequently redesigned into an all-weather interceptor, F86D, and a fighter-bomber, F86H. More than 7,800 F86 aircraft were built in the United States, Japan, and Italy between 1949 and 1956. Variants were built in Canada and Australia. The F-86 became the most produced Western jet fighter, with total production of all variants at 9,860 airframes. F4 Phantom. For nearly 4 decades of service in the U.S. military, the Phantom performed every combat task thrown at it, almost every mission ever defined. The McConnell Douglas F4 Phantom II, with top speeds more than twice that of sound, was one of the most versatile fighters ever built. It served in the first line of more Western air forces than any other jet. Just 31 months after its first flight, the F4 was the U.S. Navy's fastest, highest flying, and longest range fighter. With the U.S. entry in the Vietnam War, the F-4 became one of the most identifiable aircraft of the conflict. It served as the principal air superiority fighter for the U.S. Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, and became important in the ground attack and aerial reconnaissance roles late in the war. The first F-4s were armed only with air-to-air missiles, but after suffering serious losses to Soviet-built lighter-weight MiG-17 and MiG-21 fighters over North Vietnam, they were fitted with 20mm cannon for more effective close-range dogfighting. The second most produced Western jet fighter in history, with 5,195 units, the F-4 was extensively exported. Nations that have flown the aircraft include Israel, Great Britain, Spain, and Australia. F-15 Eagle. The F-15 Eagle has been the U.S. Air Force's primary fighter jet aircraft and intercept platform for decades. The United States Air Force commissioned the plane after they got a look at the MiG-25, a powerful fighter jet the Soviet Union unveiled in 1967. The MiG-25, commonly known as the Foxbat, was far superior to the primary U.S. fighter jet at the time, the F-4 Phantom, and in the heart of the Cold War, the Air Force needed a comparable aircraft as soon as possible. McDonnell Douglas won the contract for the new project and delivered the finished F-15 a few years later. The company has introduced several variations on this plane since then, as technology and needs have changed. The current combat F-15 Eagle is the F-15C. The Eagle's air superiority is achieved through a mixture of unprecedented maneuverability and acceleration, range, weapons, and avionics. The weapons and flight control systems are designed so one person can safely and effectively perform air-to-air combat. Until the debut of its replacement, the F-22 Raptor, the F-15 was the U.S. Air Force's frontline air superiority fighter. Even today, a modernized Eagle is still considered a formidable opponent, and manufacturer Boeing has proposed updated versions that could keep the airframe flying for the better part of a century. The F-15 is an aging but still formidable fighter. F-35. The F-35 Lightning II is a fifth-generation fighter, combining advanced stealth with fighter speed and agility, fully fused sensor information, network-enabled operations, and advanced sustainment. It is built by Lockheed Martin and many subcontractors, including Northrop Grumman, Pratt & Whitney, and BAE Systems. 3 variants of the F-35 will replace the A-10 and F-16 for the U.S. Air Force, the F-A-18 for the U.S. Navy, the F-A-18 and AV-8B Harrier for the U.S. Marine Corps, and a variety of fighters for at least 10 other countries. However, F-35 is also used to describe the aircraft it produces: F-35A, F-35B, and F-35C. The F-35A is the conventional takeoff and landing version. The F-35B is the short takeoff and vertical landing model, while the F-35C has larger wings and a more robust landing gear, making it suitable for catapult launches and fly-in encounters aboard aircraft carriers. With its aerodynamic performance and advanced integrated avionics, the F-35A will provide next-generation stealth, enhanced situational awareness, and reduced vulnerability for the United States and allied nations. The F-35 and the F-22 are the world's 2 premier fighters, but there are some differences between the aircraft. The F-35 is optimized to be a multi-role fighter with the ability to perform air-to-air, air-to-ground, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance (ISR) missions. While the F-22 is superior to the F-35 in air-to-air missions, the F-35's air-to-air capability is superior to all other fighters. The F-35 is better than any other fighter aircraft, including the F-22, for air-to-ground strike missions. As the largest and most expensive military program ever, the F-35 became the subject of much scrutiny and criticism in the U.S. and in other countries. In 2013 and 2014, critics argued that the plane was plagued with design flaws, with many blaming the procurement process, in which Lockheed was allowed to design, test, and produce the F-35 all at the same time, instead of identifying and fixing defects before firing up its production line. By 2014, the program was $163 billion over budget and 7 years behind schedule. Critics also contend that the program's high sunk costs and political momentum make it too big to kill.